Sandomier's Bridgehead, Poland, August 1948. The commander of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion was not a cautious man by disposition. Caution had not been the quality that placed him in command of Germany's most advanced armoured formation. What placed him there was confidence. The specific confidence that comes from commanding a weapon that nothing on the opposing side can stop. The Tiger II weighed 70 tons. Its frontal armour was 180 millimetres of hardened steel, angled to increase effective thickness beyond what the specification suggested. The gun it carried, the long-barreled 88mm KWK-43, could destroy any known Soviet tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 metres. German ordnance engineers had done the arithmetic. The numbers were not close. The column advanced. The explosion, when it came, did not look like what the crew expected. The shell had not penetrated the frontal armour. The Tiger II's frontal plate had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had stopped the round. What it had not been designed to stop was what happened next. The sheer kinetic mass of the impact, a 25-kilogram projectile arriving at velocity, transferred energy into the turret ring with a force that the engineers in Kassel had not calculated for. The turret, all 11 tons of it, shifted off its ring. The tank was intact. The crew could not traverse the gun. The Tiger II, the most heavily armoured tank Germany had ever fielded, had been mission-killed by a weapon that had not been designed to fight tanks. The rules had changed. The German crews just needed a moment to understand how. To understand what the IS-2 was, you need to understand the specific disaster that made it necessary. Kursk, Russia, July 1943. Operation Citadel had been Germany's attempt to reclaim strategic initiative on the Eastern Front after Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht concentrated its best armoured formations, Tigers, Panthers, Elephants, along a salient in the Soviet lines and drove them forward. The assumption was the same one that had worked in 1941 and 1942. Mass armour, coordinated air support, superior optics and gunnery, and the Red Army's defensive lines would break. The Soviet T-34-76 that met them was not an inferior tank by most measures. It was fast, reliable, and produced in numbers that German industry could not match. What it could not do was kill a Tiger away from the front at combat ranges. The 76mm gun on the T-30R required a flank shot, a rear shot, or a range so close that the engagement was already lost by the time it became possible. Soviet tank crews at Kursk died in a specific way. They closed the distance. They took fire. They tried to get around the sides of the German armour. They died before they could. The after-action analysis from Kursk was brutal in its precision. The Red Army did not lack courage. It did not lack numbers. It lacked a gun that could address a Tiger from a range at which the Tiger could not simply destroy it first. Soviet ordnance planners made a decision that German engineers would not have made. They did not begin with a tank. They began with a gun. The A-19 was a 122mm core artillery piece. It had been designed to destroy bunkers, collapse fortifications, and break prepared defensive lines at ranges beyond direct fire. It fired a projectile weighing 25 kilograms. It had not been designed to fight armour, because in 1943 no armour existed that required a 122mm shell to defeat it. By 1944, that armour existed. It was called the Tiger. Soviet engineers did not design a new gun. They took the A-19, modified its breech to accept a two-piece ammunition load, and asked a simpler question: does it fit in a turret? It fit. The IS-2, named for Joseph Stalin, the designation a political statement as much as a military one, entered production in late 1943. It was not elegant. The two-piece ammunition meant a trained crew could manage 2 to 3 rounds per minute under combat conditions. The gun's ballistic arc was not optimized for direct tank versus tank fire. The vehicle itself was heavy, mechanically demanding, and required crews who understood its specific limitations. None of that was the point. The point was the shell. German armoured doctrine in 1944 was built around a precise understanding of terminal ballistics. A high-velocity shell, the 88mm round the Tiger fired, or the long 75mm the Panther carried, worked by concentration. A dense, fast projectile struck a small area of armour plate, overcame its resistance through velocity and hardness, and passed through. The hole it made was small. The damage it did inside was specific, to crew, to equipment, to whatever the round physically contacted after penetration. It was a scalpel. The 122mm shell the IS-2 fired was not a scalpel. At muzzle, the IS-2's BR-471 armour-piercing round left the barrel at 800 meters per second. The projectile weighed 25 kilograms. The kinetic energy it carried at combat ranges was not in the same category as what German tank guns were producing. It was in a different calculation entirely. When that round struck German armour, two things happened depending on whether it penetrated. If it penetrated, and at combat ranges against the side or rear armour of a Tiger, it would. The result was catastrophic overpressure inside the tank. The shell casing, the propellant gases, and the fragments of the round itself occupied a sealed steel box in the same moment. Crews did not survive this. If it did not penetrate, if the frontal armour of a Tiger II stopped the round as it was designed to, something else happened. The energy had to go somewhere. Physics does not negotiate. 25 kilograms at 800 meters per second carries momentum that cannot simply be absorbed by plate steel without consequence. What that energy did, when stopped by armour rather than passing through it, was transfer into the structure of the tank itself. Welds cracked. Interior fittings, ammunition racks, equipment brackets, the mechanisms connecting the turret to the hull, were subjected to shock loads their designers had not specified them to absorb. The armour plate, stopped from moving outward, flexed inward. When steel flexes beyond its tolerance, it does not bend cleanly. It spalls. It sheds fragments from its interior face, fragments that travel through the crew compartment at velocities sufficient to kill without the shell ever entering the vehicle. German crews who survived IS-2 hits on vehicles that were not penetrated reported the same sequence. The impact, the sound, described consistently as different from any other caliber they had experienced. Then the interior of the tank filled with fragments they could not account for, from armour that appeared from outside to be intact. The Tiger's armour had stopped the round. The round had still killed the crew. This was not a design flaw in the Tiger. It was physics. The IS-2 was simply firing a mass that German armour had not been engineered to absorb as a kinetic event. German precision had met Soviet mass. Mass does not argue. It arrives. The Wehrmacht's response to the IS-2 followed the same pattern that Soviet and Allied forces had followed when they first encountered German weapons that exceeded their expectations. Initial contact reports were specific. The gun is larger than expected. The effect on armour is different from what our training specified. The engagement ranges at which we are effective require us to be within the IS-2's effective range first. That last point was the one that mattered. The Tiger, Orm and Tiger II had been designed around a tactical concept. The long 88mm gun gave German crews a range advantage over every Soviet tank they were likely to face. They could engage at 2,000 meters. Soviet return fire at that range, from 76mm and 85mm guns, was unlikely to penetrate frontal armour. The Tiger could sit at distance, engage methodically, and accept return fire with relative confidence. The IS-2 closed that window. At 1,000 meters, the IS-2's 192mm round carried energy sufficient to defeat the side armour of a Tiger at any angle and the frontal armour of a Tiger under the right conditions. At closer ranges, The penetration mathematics became worse for the German crew. The range advantage the Tiger had been built around did not disappear, but it shrank to a margin that changed the tactical calculus entirely. The German High Command's response was documented. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, issued guidance that reached Tiger and Panther battalion commanders in 1944. The language was specific. Engagements with IS-2 equipped formations were not to be initiated frontally. Tiger and Panther crews were directed to seek flank engagements, ambush positions, and terrain that negated the IS-2's ability to bring its gun to bear at close range. Read that again slowly. Germany's most elite armoured crews, men commanding the most heavily armoured tanks their country had ever produced, were officially instructed not to fight the IS-2 from the front. The document did not say this because the IS-2 was invincible. The IS-2 was not invincible. Its rate of fire was slow. Its optics were inferior to German equivalents. Its crews in 1944 were less individually trained than the men commanding Tiger battalions. The document said this because the cost of a frontal engagement with an IS-2, even a successful one, was unacceptable. A Tiger destroyed by an IS-2 was gone. German production in 1944 was not replacing Tigers at the rate the Eastern Front was consuming them. Every frontal engagement that could be avoided was one fewer Tiger written off against a Soviet vehicle that Soviet factories would replace within the week. Germany had spent 3 years building armoured supremacy on the Eastern Front. The IS-2 had not ended that supremacy. What it had done was more precise. It had ended the confidence that came with it. A tank force that cannot advance toward the enemy's heaviest weapon has lost something that armour plate cannot restore. Berlin, Germany, April 1945. By the time IS-2 battalions reached the German capital, the question of tank versus tank combat had become secondary. What Berlin offered was not open steppe or rolling Polish farmland. Berlin was concrete, steel-reinforced basements, and streets narrow enough that armoured vehicles became channeled targets the moment they entered them. German infantry defending Berlin had Panzerfausts, single-shot rocket weapons capable of defeating any tank from close range. The city had been prepared for urban defence. Buildings had been fortified, streets had been barricaded, basements had been connected to allow defenders to move without exposure. Every intersection was a potential ambush. Against a T-34, this defensive architecture had meaning. Against the IS-2, it had less. The 122mm high explosive shell, not the armour-piercing round, the HE round, carried a bursting charge that no building in Berlin had been constructed to absorb. A single round directed at a fortified ground floor did not disable the position. It collapsed the floor above it. German infantry defending a reinforced building were not engaging a vehicle that needed to expose itself to their weapons in order to advance. They were engaging a vehicle that could address their position structurally from a distance at which their Panzerfausts could not reach it. Soviet IS-2 tactics in Berlin were documented in after-action reports and in the accounts of crews who survived. The method was not subtle. Identify the position. Halt. Engage with HE. If the position continued to produce fire, engage again. Move forward only when the position had stopped. The German defenders of Berlin had prepared for many things. They had not prepared for a weapon that treated their fortifications as intermediate targets rather than final obstacles. The IS-2 did not win the Battle of Berlin. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers, artillery, aircraft, and the accumulated weight of 4 years of industrial warfare won the Battle of Berlin. But the IS-2 arrived at the Reichstag. The Tiger II, for which German engineers had calculated invincibility, did not. There is something precise to understand about what the IS-2 exposed between 1944 and 1945. German armoured engineering was not inferior. The Tiger II was, by every formal measure available to its designers, a masterpiece of the specifications they had been given. The armour was thick, the gun was accurate, the optics were the finest fitted to any tank in the war. German ordnance had optimised for every variable that German doctrine told them mattered. The problem was German doctrine's definition of the variables. German armour had been built for a war of precision: velocity, penetration, range, accuracy. The assumption was that armoured combat was an engineering problem, and that the side with the better engineering would control its outcomes. The IS-2 was built for a different definition of the problem. Soviet engineers did not ask how to build the most precise anti-armour weapon available. They asked how much mass they could deliver to a target at combat range and what that mass would do when it arrived. The answer was 25 kilograms at 800 meters per second, and what it did was transfer energy that no amount of armour geometry could fully absorb. Physics is not an engineering specification. It does not have tolerances. It does not respond to complexity or elegance or the quality of the optics mounted above it. The IS-2 understood this. Germany's engineers had built the finest precision instrument the armoured warfare of their era had produced. The IS-2 had not been designed to defeat that instrument. It had been designed to hit it hard enough that precision stopped mattering. In war, that is often the only calculation that does. If this is the kind of military history that belongs on your screen, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video examines a weapon so psychologically devastating that veteran soldiers refused to advance against it, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it left standing.